The city never truly slept. It only changed its noise. During the day, the sky above the lower districts was filled with drifting cargo frames, glowing transport lines, and the constant thunder of industrial engines. At night, the lights turned colder, sharper, and more distant, as if the upper levels of the megacity had pulled themselves away from everything below. In the Broken Gate district, people did not look up much anymore. It was a place built under old trade routes, where the air always carried the smell of heated metal and burned fuel. Factories stood like giant sleeping beasts, their chimneys breathing out smoke in slow, tired waves. Between them were narrow walkways, crowded shelters, and temporary housing units stacked in unstable layers. Everything in this district looked temporary, even though generations had been born and raised here. Among the workers of Broken Gate, the Dragonkin were the most physically powerful, but also some of the most overlooked. Their species had once ruled entire volcanic regions across the outer colonies. Their history was written in fire, war, and pride. But that history did not matter here. In this city, strength meant nothing without contracts, and contracts meant nothing without enforcement. And enforcement belonged to others. She was one of them. She moved through the scrap processing yard with steady steps, carrying heavy metal frames on her shoulders that would have crushed most workers from other species. Her scales were duller than they should have been, losing the natural shine of her kind due to long hours under artificial light and poor nutrition. The horns along her head were chipped in places, not from battle, but from years of passing through tight machinery spaces and low factory ceilings that were never designed for her body. She did not complain. Complaining did not change anything here. What she focused on was simple. Finish the shift. Collect the wage. Bring food back. That was all. Behind her, small footsteps followed in uneven rhythm. 3 young hatchlings tried to keep up as she moved between piles of metal debris. Their smaller wings were still developing, unable to carry them properly, so they walked instead. Their clothes were patched from old factory cloth, and their faces carried the kind of tiredness that did not belong to children. One of them tugged lightly at her sleeve. Hungry. The word was not spoken, but it did not need to be. She felt it in the way they looked at her, in the silence that followed every empty ration packet from the previous day. She slowed slightly, just enough for them to stay close. Soon, she said softly. Her voice was rough from heat and dust. We finish shift, then we eat. It was a promise she had repeated too many times. The scrapyard supervisor passed by on a hovering platform, scanning workers with a cold mechanical gaze. A floating screen next to him displayed production quotas and output rates. Numbers rose and fell like judgments. When the dragon mother passed under his view, he did not look at her as a person. He looked at her as a unit of labor. Efficiency acceptable. Fatigue increasing. Replaceable. The screen updated without emotion. The shift continued for hours. Machines screamed as they crushed old ship parts into reusable plates. Conveyor belts carried molten fragments into cooling vats. The heat was constant, pressing against skin and bone alike. Even for Dragonkin, who could withstand high temperatures, it was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with fire. It was not just physical exhaustion. It was the feeling of being used without being seen. When the final signal sounded, workers gathered near the payment terminal. It was a tall structure of polished metal and glowing interfaces, completely out of place in the rusted surroundings. It represented order, authority, and control. She stood in line, holding her identification tag tightly. The hatchlings stayed close behind her, quiet but restless. One by one, workers scanned their tags. Some received credits. Some received partial amounts. Others received error messages that required verification that would take days to resolve. When her turn came, she stepped forward. The scanner beeped once. Then again. A pause. The screen flickered. Then it displayed a reduced amount. She frowned slightly. This was not the first time. This is incorrect, she said carefully. My shift was full hours. Overtime was approved. The terminal remained silent for a moment before displaying a standard message. Resource adjustment applied due to district-wide shortage allocation. Dispute requests may be filed within processing cycle. She stared at it. Around her, other workers were already walking away, too tired to argue, too used to it to care. But she did care. Not for herself. For the small bodies waiting behind her. I only need my wages, she said, her voice lower now. My children have not eaten since yesterday's cycle. The words were simple. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just real. For a brief moment, a few nearby workers looked in her direction. Some showed sympathy. Some showed fear. Most looked away. No one spoke. She turned slightly toward the guild overseer's platform above the terminal. He was watching everything, leaning back as if bored. His uniform was clean, untouched by the dirt of the district below, a symbol of distance. She raised her voice just enough for him to hear. My work is done. My children are hungry. Release the full payment. A small silence followed. Then the overseer smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind used when power knows it does not need to explain itself. Dragonkin always think they deserve more, he said casually. His voice carried through the speakers so everyone could hear. You are fortunate to have employment at all. The district is under strain. Adjustments are necessary. She stepped forward slightly. I am not asking for more, she said. Only what I earned. The overseer tilted his head. And if I say no? The question hung in the air like a blade. Behind her, the hatchlings shifted uneasily. One of them made a small sound, quickly silenced by fear. The overseer continued. You are strong. You will survive. That is what your kind does, yes? Survive. A few quiet laughs came from somewhere in the crowd. Not many, just enough to make it worse. Her hands tightened, but she did not move, because moving would not change anything. Not here. The overseer leaned closer to his console. Denied. Next. The line moved again as if nothing had happened. She stood there for a moment longer, still holding her tag, still waiting for a system that would not change its answer. Then slowly, she stepped back. Defeat was not something she showed easily, but exhaustion had a way of breaking even pride down into silence. She turned toward the exit. The hatchlings followed. Behind them, the district continued as if nothing had happened. Machines kept running. Credits kept shifting. Hunger remained invisible. Above all of it, in a level of the city she never had access to, something else was watching. Not the overseer. Not the machines. Someone else. And for the first time in a long time, the system had been observed by a pair of human eyes that did not belong to the district, and did not intend to ignore what it had seen. She did not go straight home after the shift ended. There was no real home in the Broken Gate district. Only shelters that held out the cold and noise for a few hours at a time before the next cycle began. But she still called it that because the hatchlings needed the word to mean something. The walk back was longer than it should have been. Not because of distance, but because of weight. Not the metal she had carried all day. The emptiness inside her stomach, and the silence of unpaid work. The hatchlings followed closely, their small steps dragging through the dust-covered path. The city lights above flickered through broken structures, casting long shadows across the walkways. Every shadow looked like something waiting. In places like this, even shadows felt hungry. She kept one hand slightly behind her so the smallest hatchling could hold it if needed. The child's grip was weak, but steady enough to show trust. That trust was the only thing she could not afford to lose. As they passed under an old support bridge, she slowed. A food stall once operated there years ago. Now it was just a collapsed frame with faded signs still hanging, swinging slightly in the wind. The smell of cooked meals no longer existed there, but memory filled the space anyway. One of the hatchlings stopped and looked up. Hungry again. She knelt down slowly, lowering herself to their level. Her movements were careful, controlled, as if she was trying not to show the strain in her body. I know, she said quietly. I know it is hard. She opened a small storage pouch attached to her belt. Inside was a single ration packet. It was thin, half-damaged, something she had been saving for emergencies. She stared at it for a moment longer than she intended. Then she broke it into 3 small portions. Not equal. Not enough. But enough to stop tears. She handed the first piece to the smallest hatchling. Then the second. The third she kept in her own hand but did not eat yet. Eat slowly, she said. We will find more tomorrow. It was a lie she had told before. But sometimes lies were just promises waiting for better days. They sat there for a few minutes, surrounded by broken metal and old city dust, while the hatchlings ate in silence. The sound of chewing was soft, almost fragile, like something that might disappear if the wind changed direction. Above them, transport lights moved across the sky lanes. They carried supplies, luxury goods, and sealed containers marked for upper districts. None of them slowed down. None of them dropped anything. Life in the lower district was never part of their route. When the children finished eating, they looked slightly better. Not full. Not satisfied. Just less empty. She stood again and continued walking. But something felt different now. Not outside. Inside the system. She could not name it, but there was a shift in how people moved around her. Workers in the distance avoided eye contact more than usual. A few whispered among themselves, then stopped when she came closer. Even the security drones overhead seemed to pause slightly longer than normal before continuing their patrol path. She ignored it, because in Broken Gate, attention was rarely good news. By the time they reached the shelter block, the night cycle had fully begun. The structure they lived in was an old cargo container conversion stacked into multiple layers. Each unit had been modified repeatedly over the years, making the walls uneven and the doors slightly misaligned. Inside, the air was warm but stale. Many families shared the same structure. Exhausted workers sat quietly in corners, resting before the next shift. Some slept already, fully dressed, because removing clothes meant wasting energy they did not have. She guided the hatchlings to their small sleeping space. It was not much more than a padded floor section with thin covering sheets. But it was theirs. One of the hatchlings curled up immediately. Another stayed sitting, watching her. Sleep, she said gently. The child hesitated. Will there be food tomorrow? The question was simple, but it carried everything behind it. She paused before answering. Yes, she said. Again, not fully true, but necessary. After they settled down, she stood near the edge of the shelter for a while. The noise outside continued without pause. Machines never stopped in Broken Gate. Even at night, the district worked like it was afraid of silence. She looked at her payment tag again. Reduced wages. Same message. Same explanation. District-wide shortage allocation. It did not explain where the shortage went. She had stopped expecting explanations a long time ago. Still, something inside her refused to accept it quietly. Not anger exactly. Something quieter. A slow pressure that built over time when injustice repeated itself too many times to ignore. She left the shelter again without making noise. Outside, the air felt colder. The walk back toward the guild terminal was not planned. She told herself it was pointless. The decision was already made. Nothing would change if she returned. But her feet still moved, step by step. The city above her glowed brighter as she approached the central district edge. The further she walked, the cleaner the environment became. Less dust, more light, fewer broken structures. It was not a different city. It was the same city divided into layers of permission. She stopped at a boundary checkpoint where security barriers marked access zones. A drone scanned her briefly. Unauthorized entry, it stated. I need to speak about my wages, she said. Denied access. She stood there for a moment. Behind the barrier, she could see the upper walkway where guild staff moved freely. Clean uniforms. Controlled steps. No exhaustion visible in their movements. She spoke again, louder this time. My payment was reduced without reason. I request correction. The drone paused, then repeated. Denied access. A second drone approached, scanning her more closely. His voice was slightly different, more formal. Return to designated labor district. She clenched her jaw. Then she stepped back. Not because she accepted it, but because pushing further would not feed the hatchlings. As she turned away, she noticed something unusual. A human, not a worker, not a laborer. A human logistics engineer badge was visible on his chest, partially covered by a light protective coat. Humans were rare in Broken Gate. They usually stayed in higher or controlled sectors where environmental risks were lower. He was standing near a monitoring panel, looking directly at the same wage terminal records she had used earlier. Not casually, carefully, like someone reading something that did not make sense. For a moment their eyes met. He did not look away immediately. Most others did. He studied her briefly, then glanced at the drone system, then back to the panel. She expected him to move on. Most people did. Instead, he stepped closer to the terminal interface and began scrolling through data logs. The security drone shifted slightly. Access restricted, it warned. He did not respond at first. He just kept reading. Then he spoke calmly. This allocation pattern is incorrect. The drone paused. She did not understand what he meant, but the tone was different from anything she had heard in this district. It was not emotional, not angry, just certain. He tapped the panel again. These reductions are not matching district output reports. The drone repeated its warning. He finally looked at it. I am within audit authority, he said. That phrase changed the atmosphere slightly. Even the drone's tone adjusted. Verification required. He showed his credentials. A small projection expanded in the air. The drone scanned it. There was a longer pause this time. Then the system responded. Authority confirmed. She watched silently from a distance. The human did not look at her yet. He was still focused on the data, as if the problem in front of him mattered more than anything else around him. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he said, "This is not shortage allocation." He paused. "This is wage diversion." The words did not mean much to her at first, but the way he said them made the air feel different, like something hidden had just been named for the first time. And in Broken Gate, naming something was often the first step toward breaking it. She did not understand the words the human used. Wage diversion. They sounded like something important, but distant, like a law written in a place she would never be allowed to enter. Still, she did not leave. Something about the way he stood there made it hard to walk away. He was not looking at her the way most others did. Not as a unit, not as labor, not as something worn down and replaceable. He was looking at the system itself, as if it had made a mistake that could be proven. That was new. Most people in Broken Gate looked at problems like weather. If it was bad, you endured it. If it got worse, you adjusted. Nobody expected it to be corrected. But this human was not adjusting. He was studying. The guild terminal beside him continued displaying data streams. Lines of credits moved through accounts too fast to follow. He tapped a few commands, then paused, as if something did not fit what he expected. Behind her, one of the security drones hovered closer again. Unauthorized analysis detected, it warned. He responded without turning. I am within legal audit scope. The drone hesitated again. That hesitation was enough to show something unusual was happening. She took a small step forward. I do not understand, she said carefully. My wages were reduced. They said the district needs resources. The human finally turned toward her. Not fully, just enough to acknowledge her voice. That is what they told you, he said. She nodded slowly. It happens often. That sentence came out without emotion. Not because she did not feel anything, but because feeling too much had become dangerous. He looked back at the terminal. It should not happen at this scale. She frowned slightly. What scale? He pointed at the floating data. These reductions are not isolated. They are structured, repeated, predictable. She did not understand the details, but she understood patterns. Life in Broken Gate was built on them. Bad shifts came in cycles. Food shortages came in cycles. Payment delays came in cycles. He continued speaking. Your district produces enough output to meet wage obligations. But the recorded distribution shows systematic removal before payout. He paused. Someone is taking it before it reaches you. She stared at him. Taking it. That word landed differently, because it suggested intention. Not shortage, not mistake, but choice. Her voice lowered slightly. Who? The human did not answer immediately. Instead, he accessed another layer of data. His eyes moved quickly across information streams only partially visible to her. Then he said something that made nearby workers slow down and listen without meaning to. Guild financial routing. The security drone moved closer again. Cease unauthorized access. The human finally turned toward it. I am not accessing restricted systems, he said calmly. I am verifying public wage compliance records. The drone paused again. This hesitation was becoming a pattern. She noticed it now. Machines were not supposed to hesitate. He continued working. Minutes passed. The area around the terminal slowly became quieter. Not because people left, but because they stopped moving as much. Workers nearby began watching in silence. Not because they understood, but because something unusual was happening to the structure that controlled their daily survival. She remained where she stood. Her hatchlings were not there. They were asleep in the shelter. That thought kept her from panicking too much. The human suddenly stopped moving. He stared at a single data line. Then he exhaled slowly. There it is, he said. She stepped slightly closer. What is there? He pointed. This account receives transfers from multiple district wage pools before redistribution. She tried to follow the meaning. So, it collects? Yes, he said. And then it redistributes fairly? He looked at her for a moment. No. That single word changed the atmosphere again. He zoomed into another section of data. These funds do not return to labor distribution. They are redirected into private reserves under administrative classification. She slowly processed that. Private reserves. She had heard similar words before in passing. Upper districts, storage vaults, emergency allocations. Things that sounded important but never reached her hands. Her voice became quieter. So the wages are gone before we get them? He nodded. Yes. A long silence followed. Even the drones did not interrupt. She looked down at her hands. They were still rough from work. Burned. Slightly from heat exposure. They had carried metal all day, every day, for cycles she could not count. All of it. For numbers that were removed before she ever saw them. Her throat tightened slightly, but she kept her voice steady. Why? The human did not answer immediately, because this was the part that was harder to explain. Finally, he said, because the system allows it. She looked up at him. That is not an answer. He nodded once. I know. Then he added something more direct. It is corruption hidden inside legal structure. The words did not soften the meaning. They made it clearer. The drones shifted again, as if reacting to rising system alert levels. But they did not intervene. She noticed that too. The system was watching but not stopping. That realization made something cold settle inside her. If it was wrong, why was it allowed? The human continued working. I can trace where it goes, he said. She watched him. Can it be stopped? He hesitated. That hesitation mattered more than anything else. Yes, he said finally. But not quietly. She did not fully understand what that meant. Quiet was how she had always survived. Quiet work. Quiet hunger. Quiet injustice. But something about his tone suggested quiet would not fix this. He turned slightly toward her. You are the one who reported wage discrepancy at the terminal earlier? She nodded. I asked for my pay. He studied her for a moment. And they denied you? Yes. He looked back at the data. That denial is consistent across hundreds of workers in this district. She felt something tighten in her chest. Hundreds. She had always believed her situation was personal. Problem of her shift. Her supervisor. Her timing. But now it was larger. Much larger. The human continued. This is not shortage management. It is extraction. The word hit harder than the previous ones. Extraction. Like something being taken repeatedly from a source that could not resist. She suddenly thought of her hatchlings again. Their small hands. Their quiet hunger. the single ration she had split earlier. All of it suddenly felt connected to something bigger than survival. Something structured. The human closed the data window. "I will escalate this," he said. She looked at him carefully. "Escalate." He nodded. "To interspecies labor authority oversight." She had heard of that before. Not often. Mostly in rumors. A distant body that was supposed to protect workers, but rarely appeared in Broken Gate. She frowned slightly. "And what happens then?" He looked at her directly this time. "If confirmed, enforcement action is taken." She did not understand what that meant in detail, but she understood one thing clearly. Action meant change. Her voice lowered. "Will we get our wages back?" He did not promise easily. "That depends on how deep this goes." That answer was honest. And honesty was not common in Broken Gate. The security drone suddenly emitted a sharper tone. "Unauthorized financial exposure detected. Audit escalation flagged." More drones began to appear in the distance. Not aggressive yet, but alert. The human noticed immediately. "They know," he said quietly. She looked around. For the first time, she saw movement changing in the district. Workers were being instructed to disperse. Screens were flickering with system messages. Something invisible had shifted. He stepped slightly back from the terminal. "I need to secure the data." She watched him carefully. "This will bring trouble?" He looked at her. "Yes." She glanced toward the direction of the shelter, toward her hatchlings, then back at him. "If you stop, will it go back to how it was?" He shook his head. "No." That answer was simple, but heavy. She took a slow breath. "Then do not stop." The human studied her for a moment longer, not surprised, just confirming something. Then he nodded once. "Understood." He turned back to the terminal and began transferring data streams into secure storage. Lines of information moved rapidly across the screen. The system tried to interrupt. Alerts increased. Drone presence expanded. But he did not stop. And for the first time in a long time, something inside the Broken Gate district began moving in a direction it was never designed for. Not survival, not endurance, but exposure. The warning signals did not come all at once. They started as small changes in the environment. Lights along the upper walkway flickered for a fraction of a second longer than usual. Security drones adjusted their patrol paths in tighter loops. The background noise of the district shifted, like a machine that had suddenly noticed a foreign object inside its system. Most people in Broken Gate did not understand what was happening, but they felt it. That feeling was enough to make them slow down. Stop talking. Look around without knowing why. The human did not move away from the terminal. He kept working. The data transfer was still running, pushing large sets of financial records, routing logs, and wage distribution chains into a secure external buffer. Each line of data he pulled out seemed to make the system more aware that something important was being removed. The security drones were the first to respond directly. 2 of them descended closer, scanning his identification again. "Cease unauthorized data extraction," one of them said. He did not look up. "I am completing an authorized audit transfer." "Authorization conflict detected," the drone replied. That was new. The human finally paused for a second, then tapped a command. His expression stayed calm, but his focus sharpened. "They are trying to override my clearance," he said quietly. She stood a few steps behind him, watching everything unfold. She did not understand the technical details, but she understood tension. It was the same feeling that came before factory accidents, before ration cuts, before punishment notices. Something was building. More drones arrived. This time, they were not just observation units. Their positioning shifted into a containment pattern. Workers nearby were instructed to move away from the terminal zone. The crowd slowly began to spread out, forming a wide empty circle around the human and the console. She noticed people staring at him now, not with curiosity anymore, with fear. Because when systems reacted like this, it usually meant someone had crossed a line that was not meant to be crossed. The human continued typing. Lines of data streamed faster. She stepped slightly closer again. "Is this dangerous for you?" she asked. He did not stop working. "Yes," he replied. That simple answer carried no emotion, just fact. She hesitated. "Then stop." He glanced at her briefly. "If I stop now, the evidence disappears back into their system." She did not understand everything, but she understood disappearance. Things disappeared in Broken Gate all the time. Food disappeared. Credits disappeared. Even people sometimes disappeared from records after accidents. So she did not argue further. But she stayed, because walking away felt worse than danger. A sudden shift happened in the system interface. The terminal screen flashed red for a moment. Then a new message appeared. External audit breach detected. Initiating containment protocol. The drones immediately changed formation. Now they were not just observing. They were preparing to shut the system down around him. The human noticed instantly. "They are locking me out," he said. His fingers moved faster. She saw something different in him now. Not fear. Not hesitation. Just increased urgency. Like someone finishing a task before time runs out. A loud mechanical sound echoed through the district edge. Not an alarm. A structural response signal. Parts of the terminal platform began sealing itself off. Transparent barriers started rising around the area, slowly enclosing the space. Workers nearby backed away quickly. Whispers spread. "What is happening? Why is the system closing? Is there a breach?" She felt her chest tighten. The human was being enclosed. She stepped forward slightly. "They are trapping you," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Why don't you leave?" He looked at her for a brief moment. "Because I need this data to leave first." That answer did not make full sense to her. But she understood the idea of sacrifice. The barrier continued rising. One of the drones moved closer and extended a scanning beam directly toward the terminal. "Final warning," it stated. "Disengage or enforcement will begin." The human did not respond. Instead, he initiated a final transfer sequence. The screen displayed a large progress bar. She did not know what the numbers meant, but she could see it was not finished. Not yet. The barrier was now halfway closed. Time was running out. Then something unexpected happened. A second system layer activated. Not from the drones. Not from the guild. But from the broader city network. A new voice echoed through the area speakers. "Interference detected in wage distribution system." The drones paused. This voice was different. More formal. Higher authority. She felt a strange shift in the air. Like something larger had just noticed the situation. The human's eyes narrowed slightly. "They escalated it," he said. She looked at him. "What does that mean?" He answered quickly. "It means higher authority is now watching." The barrier slowed for a moment. Not stopping. Just adjusting. Like the system itself was uncertain how to proceed. The human used that moment. He pushed the final data packet through. The screen flashed. Transfer complete. A second later, everything changed. The system lights flickered across the district grid. Every terminal connected to wage distribution began displaying warning messages. Unauthorized financial routing exposed. Audit escalation in progress. Funds trace active. Workers in the distance began noticing their own screens changing. Some stopped walking. Some turned back toward the terminals. Confusion spread faster now. She heard someone whisper nearby. "My account changed." Another voice. "There is credit movement." The human stepped back slightly from the terminal. He exhaled once. Not relief, just completion. But the system was not done. The drones shifted again, this time more aggressively. "Containment breach confirmed," one of them said. The barrier finally closed around the terminal zone. The human was now inside a sealed space. She was still outside. She stepped forward instinctively. A drone immediately blocked her path. Access denied. She stopped. Inside the enclosure, the human looked at her. Not worried, just focused. He spoke through the barrier. "Listen carefully." She nodded. "The data is already out," he said. "They cannot fully erase it now. She did not understand everything, but she understood the important part. Could not be erased. That meant it was real. He continued. They will try to control the narrative. They will call it a system error or unauthorized manipulation. She frowned slightly. So nothing changes? He shook his head. No. It changes everything. But not immediately. That part was hard. Because immediate change was what hunger demanded. Not later. Not eventually. Now. A loud mechanical sound echoed again. The drones prepared to remove him from the enclosure. But before they could act, another signal interrupted them. A new authority layer had fully engaged. External Oversight Authority confirmed. The system announced. All drones froze briefly. Even the barrier lights flickered. The human looked up slightly. They accepted it, he said quietly. She did not know what that meant in full, but she felt the tension shift again. Like a pressure that had been holding everything down was starting to loosen. For the first time since she had stepped into this area, the system was no longer fully in control. Outside the enclosure, workers were gathering again. Not close, but watching. Screens across the district were now displaying financial trace alerts. Some people began realizing something was wrong with the wage system. Not just for her. For everyone. The human spoke one last time through the barrier. This will not be fast, he said. But it has started. She nodded slowly. Then, quietly, she said something she did not expect herself to say. My children are hungry. He looked at her for a moment, then replied simply, I know. And for the first time, that statement did not feel like dismissal. It felt like the beginning of something that would not allow hunger to stay invisible anymore. The enclosure did not open immediately. Even after the higher authority signal confirmed external oversight, the system did not simply release control. It hesitated in its own way, running verification loops, checking permissions, and rechecking commands as if trying to find a reason to keep things locked. But something had changed, and systems, even large ones, cannot ignore change once it is fully recorded. Outside the sealed terminal zone, the Broken Gate district was no longer behaving the same way it had before. Workers stood in small groups near their stations, staring at their personal wage displays. Some blinked repeatedly, thinking it was an error in their vision. Others tapped their screens again and again, as if repetition could force the truth to change. It did not change. For the first time in a long time, numbers were moving in the opposite direction. Small credit corrections appeared in accounts marked with long periods of adjustment loss. Hidden deductions were slowly being reversed. Not fully, not everywhere, but enough for people to notice something was happening inside the system that had always felt untouchable. A low wave of confusion moved through the district. Then came silence. Not the usual tired silence of workers who had nothing left to say. This was different. This was attention. Inside the sealed zone, the human stood near the terminal, watching the system finalize its response. His hands were still steady, but his focus was no longer on extraction. The data transfer was complete. What remained was confirmation and enforcement from higher levels. The drones around him no longer moved aggressively. They hovered in standby patterns, awaiting updated instructions. The barrier that had closed earlier remained in place, but its glow had softened slightly, no longer reading as active containment. It was now more like observation. She was still outside the barrier, close enough to see him clearly, far enough that she could not hear everything without strain. But she did not move away. The feeling that had brought her here in the first place was still there. Hunger, yes, but now it was mixed with something else. Something she did not have a word for yet. Change, maybe. Uncertainty. Or the beginning of hope that had not been allowed to exist before. A new message appeared across the district network. Wage distribution audit confirmed. The words repeated on every screen. Not once. Many times. Workers began reading it out loud without realizing they were doing so. Audit confirmed. What does that mean? Is it real? Inside the sealed zone, the human finally spoke again. They are forced to acknowledge it now, he said. She stepped slightly closer to the barrier. So it was true? She asked. Yes, he replied. Every part of it. There was no pride in his voice, only confirmation, as if truth itself was not something to celebrate, but something that simply needed to be recognized. The system voice returned again, this time more structured. Financial misconduct detected within guild-level wage routing. Pause followed. Then another line appeared. Temporary wage hold lifted pending redistribution correction. That sentence spread faster than anything else. Within moments, workers across the district began reacting. Some laughed quietly, unsure if it was real. Some cried without sound. Some just stood still, staring at their hands as if they did not belong to them anymore. She felt something tighten in her chest again, but this time it was not hunger. It was disbelief, because she had lived long enough in Broken Gate to understand one rule. Things did not get returned. Once taken, they stayed gone. But now something was being given back. Slowly, unevenly, but still moving. The human turned slightly, looking at her through the barrier. Your account will be corrected first cycle adjustment, he said. She did not respond immediately. Her mind was still trying to accept the idea that correction was even possible. Then she finally spoke. Will it be enough? He hesitated for a moment. That depends on how much was taken. That answer was honest again. But this time it did not feel like distance. It felt like reality being admitted fully, without soft edges. Outside, movement in the district increased. Workers began heading toward terminals again. Not in fear this time, but in cautious expectation. Some security drones attempted to maintain order, but their commands were no longer absolute. Their systems were still functioning, but their authority had been partially overridden by the audit confirmation. One of the drones near her shifted position. Dispersal recommended, it said. She ignored it. Her attention was still on the human. Inside the barrier, he began packing the final data fragments into secured memory storage. His work was almost done, but the consequences of it were only beginning. She finally asked the question that had been forming inside her since everything started. Why did you do this? He paused. It was not a question he answered quickly, because the answer was not simple. He looked around at the system enclosure, then at the distant movement of the district beyond it. Then he said, because it was wrong. She frowned slightly. That is not a reason people usually act on here. He nodded. I know. A short silence followed. Then he added something more personal. Because I could see it clearly. That part was harder to explain. But she understood something in it. Seeing clearly was rare in Broken Gate. Most people learned to blur things, to accept partial truths, to survive without asking too many questions. He had not done that. The system around them emitted another signal. Correction protocol initiated. That phrase caused immediate reactions across the district. Credits began updating again. Not all at once, but in waves. Some accounts increased suddenly. Others corrected slowly. Some still showed errors, marked for review. But the direction had changed. For the first time, it was moving toward balance instead of extraction. She felt her chest tighten again. But this time it was different. Not fear. Not confusion. Something closer to relief. But it was still fragile. The human stepped closer to the barrier edge. This will not fix everything, he said. She nodded slowly. I know. Because she did know. Hunger did not disappear in a moment. Years of loss did not vanish in a single correction cycle. But something had shifted. And in Broken Gate, shifts like this did not happen often. He continued. They will try to repair the system quietly. They will limit exposure. They will call it a correction event, not corruption. She listened carefully. But people will know? He nodded. Yes, because they have already seen it. That was the key part. Seeing. Once something was seen clearly, it could not be fully hidden again. A loud signal echoed across the district. The barrier around him finally began to retract. Slowly. Not violently, just unlocking layer by layer. The drones moved back into neutral positions. The system no longer treated him as a threat. He stepped forward out of the enclosure. Now there was no barrier between them, only space. She did not move at first, just watched him carefully as he approached the edge where she stood. He stopped a short distance away, close enough to speak normally, far enough to respect space. She looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "My children ate today because I broke the ration into pieces." He listened. She continued, "That is how we live." He nodded once. "I understand." She shook her head slightly. "No, you do not. But you saw it." That distinction mattered to her. Understanding was rare, but seeing was real. He looked down for a moment, then back at her. "You will not be alone in this system anymore," he said. She did not fully understand what that meant, but she believed it more than anything else she had heard in a long time. Behind them, the district continued to update. Credits were still adjusting. Messages were still being processed. People were still reacting. But the tone had changed. Fear had not disappeared. Hunger had not disappeared. But silence had been broken. She turned slightly toward the direction of the shelter, then back at him. "Will it stay like this?" she asked. He answered honestly again. "No system stays changed without pressure." She nodded slowly, then said something simple. "Then we remember." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That is enough to start." She finally turned to leave, not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time going back did not feel exactly like returning to the same darkness. The hatchlings were still waiting. Food was still uncertain. Life was still hard. But something new had entered the Broken Gate district. Not wealth, not peace, not safety, just truth that could no longer be fully erased. And in places like this, even that much was enough to begin changing everything that came next.